My uncle Victor stood at my grandmother's memorial reception, champagne glass in hand, and told 40 relatives that I hadn't earned a single dollar of the family's respect. "She types on a laptop and calls it a business," he said, loud enough for the caterers to hear. "Some of us actually build things." He didn't know that 3 days earlier I'd found a wire transfer with his signature on it, moving $200,000 out of my grandmother's trust and into a company that didn't exist anywhere except on paper. I smiled at him that night and said nothing. That silence was the last mistake he ever got to make in comfort. My name is Lena Reed. I'm 34, and I run a cybersecurity firm that protects financial systems for mid-sized companies across the Pacific Northwest. 6 years ago, when I told my family I was leaving my analyst job to start my own firm, my uncle Victor laughed so hard he had to put down his coffee. Victor had run my grandfather's construction company for 2 decades, and after my grandfather passed, he'd folded most of the family's assets into a trust he managed as executor. He liked being the one everyone answered to. My success didn't fit the story he told about himself, so he simply refused to see it. At every holiday, every funeral, every family dinner, he found a way to remind the room that I was the niece who played with computers, while he was the one who kept this family together. I let him have that story for years, because fighting him for credit felt smaller than building something real. That patience is what let me see everything he thought he'd hidden. The trust itself was simple on paper. My grandmother, after my grandfather died, consolidated the family's remaining property and savings into an estate trust with Victor as sole executor and 4 beneficiaries, including me, my sister, my cousin, and Victor himself. Victor handled the books. Nobody else asked questions because nobody else understood the spreadsheets. And honestly, nobody wanted to. I hadn't looked closely either. Not until my grandmother's health started failing last winter, and she asked me, almost offhand, to just check that everything is the way it should be. "Since you're good with that sort of thing." She trusted me the way she never quite trusted Victor's confidence. I said I would. I didn't expect to find anything. That's usually when you find something. I started small. My firm does security audits for a handful of local businesses, and I have legitimate remote access to several accounting systems as part of that work, including, as a family favor 2 years earlier, the trust's financial software, which Victor had asked me to just take a look at once when it kept crashing. He'd forgotten I still had a login. People forget that convenience becomes evidence. I logged in one evening, intending to check a handful of routine disbursements, and noticed a line item labeled Meridian Property Advisors Consulting Retainer, quarterly. I didn't recognize the name. I searched it. Nothing. No website, no business registration in Washington state, no LinkedIn page, no employees, nothing. A company that had received 4 separate payments over 18 months totaling just under $200,000 and existed nowhere except inside my uncle's ledger. I want to be honest about what that moment felt like. It wasn't triumph. It was a cold, specific dread, the kind that makes your hands go still on the keyboard. Because if I was right, this wasn't just Victor being controlling or dismissive of me at Thanksgiving. This was Victor quietly draining an 84-year-old woman's trust while telling everyone, including her, that he was protecting it. I didn't confront him. I want you to understand why. Victor was the kind of man who rewrote the story the second he felt cornered, who could turn any accusation into a referendum on your character instead of his behavior. If I walked into his office and said, "Explain Meridian," he would have 30 seconds to invent an answer, delete a file, or make a call. I needed him to keep believing I was harmless. So at the next family dinner, when he asked how the little computer business was going, I said it was going fine, kept my eyes soft, and let him feel like the biggest man at the table. I became 2 versions of myself that spring. One who laughed at his jokes over pot roast. One who, every night after, opened a secure folder on my own encrypted drive and added another piece to a file that was slowly becoming impossible to argue with. I brought in Priya Malhotra, a forensic accountant I'd worked with on a fraud case for a client 2 years earlier. I paid her out of my own pocket and told her almost nothing about the family relationship at first, just handed her the transaction history and asked her to trace Meridian Property Advisors to its source. It took her 3 weeks. Meridian, it turned out, was a shell registered in Nevada under an LLC whose sole listed agent shared a P.O. box with a storage unit facility 40 minutes from Victor's house. The wire transfers routing to Meridian eventually rerouted, in 2 of the 4 cases, to a personal account under Victor's wife's maiden name. Priya sent me the final report with one line at the top. This isn't sloppy bookkeeping. This is structured. Structured meant intentional. Structured meant a pattern designed to look like nothing if no one ever checked closely. And Victor had spent 2 decades making sure no one in this family checked closely on him. He'd built his authority on being the one who understood money, so the rest of us didn't have to. That authority was the whole scheme. While Priya built the financial trail, I quietly reached out to my grandmother's estate attorney, a careful, unhurried man named Dennis Akafer, who had drafted the trust documents originally. I didn't accuse anyone. I asked questions about executor obligations, about what happens when a beneficiary suspects a breach of fiduciary duty, about what kind of documentation a court would actually need. Dennis told me something I've thought about often since. People who abuse trust rarely think anyone in the family is paying close enough attention to catch them. That's usually true, until it isn't. My grandmother passed in early spring, peacefully in her sleep, before I ever told her what I'd found. Some nights I still wonder if that was mercy or cowardice on my part. I've decided it was mercy. She didn't need her last months clouded by the knowledge that the nephew she trusted most had been quietly robbing her. The memorial reception was held at the community hall, where she used to run bingo nights, string lights, and folding chairs, and a table of casseroles nobody would finish. Victor gave the toast. He talked about legacy, about carrying the family forward the way he always had, about being the one who held everything together while some of us were off chasing hobbies. That's when he looked at me, glass raised, and made the comment about typing on a laptop. A few relatives laughed uncomfortably. My sister shot me a look. I just smiled because by then I already had everything I needed sitting in a folder on a secure drive, and Victor had just handed me, in front of 40 witnesses, one more piece of proof about exactly who he thought he was dealing with. Have you ever watched someone humiliate you in public while holding, without knowing it, the exact rope they were about to hang themselves with? I didn't say a word that night. I hugged my aunts, thanked people for coming, and drove home in silence. The next morning, I called Dennis and told him I was ready to file a formal request for a fiduciary accounting, the legal mechanism that forces an executor to open every book to a court-appointed review. Under Washington trust law, any beneficiary can request this if they have reasonable cause to suspect mismanagement. Dennis said reasonable cause was the easy part now. The hard part, he said, would be making sure Victor didn't get the chance to shred anything first. That's where Victor's carelessness finally caught up with him. 2 weeks after the memorial, still confident that nobody was watching, he made his real mistake. The trust's financial software, the same one I had legacy access to, logged every user session with a timestamp. On a Tuesday afternoon, Victor logged in and manually altered a distribution schedule, quietly reducing my sister's and my allocated shares by 4% each, and increasing his own by the same amount, backdating the change to look like it had been part of the original 2021 amendment. He was clumsy about it. He didn't realize the software kept an immutable revision history, a feature I had specifically recommended installing years earlier for exactly this reason. Back when I still thought I was just being a helpful niece, every edit he made was time-stamped, logged, and attributed to his login. He had in effect signed a confession. I forwarded the revision log straight to Dennis. 2 days later, Dennis filed the petition for a court-ordered accounting, citing the shell company payments, the falsified distribution schedule, and Priya's forensic report as supporting evidence. The hearing wasn't dramatic in the way people expect. It happened in a small conference room at the county courthouse. Gray carpet, fluorescent lights, a court-appointed special master reviewing documents at a folding table. Victor arrived in his good suit, the one he wore to weddings, clearly expecting to charm his way through a misunderstanding. He looked at me sitting beside Dennis with a stack of Priya's report and the printed revision logs, and I watched something in his face shift. The particular expression of a man realizing the room already knows the answer before he's spoken. The special master asked him to explain Meridian Property Advisors. He said it was a consulting firm that had helped modernize some of the trust's property holdings. The special master asked for a contract, an invoice, anything. Victor said the paperwork was informal. The special master then asked him to explain why 2 of the 4 wire transfers had rerouted into an account under his wife's maiden name. Victor's lawyer asked for a recess. It was granted. It didn't matter. By the time we reconvened, the numbers had already done what I never could have done by yelling at him across a dinner table. I only said one thing to him that day, in the hallway outside the conference room. while his lawyer murmured something urgent into his ear. I said, "This isn't a family matter anymore, Victor. It's a matter of record." He didn't respond. I don't think he had anything left that would have sounded true. The court removed Victor as executor within 6 weeks, appointing a neutral trustee to oversee the estate going forward. He was ordered to repay the misappropriated funds with interest, and the county prosecutor's office opened a separate inquiry into potential fraud. Though, as of the last update I received, no charges had been formally filed. Some doors like that stay open a long time. His construction company, which had quietly used trust assets as informal collateral for 2 loans, lost its primary line of credit when the bank learned about the pending litigation. The story moved through the family the way stories like this always do, in hushed phone calls and long pauses at the ends of sentences. Nobody laughed at my laptop after that. My Aunt Ruth, Victor's older sister, called me the week after the hearing. She didn't apologize outright, but she said something I've held on to. "I always thought you were the quiet one because you didn't have much to say. I didn't realize you were just the one who was actually paying attention." I told her that was fair. I didn't need her to say more than that. My relationship with Victor now is what you'd expect. We don't speak. He sent one message through his lawyer months later, asking whether I would be willing to keep this within the family going forward. I didn't respond to that either. Some silences are answers. What I kept in the end wasn't the money, though the trust was restored and split the way my grandmother intended. What I kept was the quiet certainty that I never had to raise my voice to be believed. I didn't win by proving I was smarter than him at a dinner table. I won by being patient enough to let the truth build itself into something undeniable. One log transaction, one careless edit, one arrogant toast at a time. I still run my company. It's grown since then. Twice the size it was the year Victor told a room full of relatives I didn't build real things. Sometimes I think about that revision log, the one small feature I recommended years earlier, without knowing why it would matter. And I think about how often the thing that saves you is a decision you made long before you knew you'd need it. If you'd been standing in that hall the night he humiliated you in front of everyone you love, would you have confronted him on the spot? Or would you have done what I did and waited until the proof could speak for itself?